Our next presentation is on Inspiring Generosity and Stewards. Father Robert Holet, a priest of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the USA, has served in leadership of the UOC Metropolia as a parish priest in Pennsylvania and as founding pastor of St. Nicholas Orthodox Church in Charlottesville, Virginia. Father Robert completed studies at Penn State University, Byzantine Catholic Seminary, and the Antiochian House of Studies, leading to a doctorate of ministry from Pittsburgh Theological Seminary in conjunction with the Antiochian House of Studies. Building on his study of Orthodox stewardship, he published The First and Finest Orthodox Christian Stewardship as Sacred Offering. He offers reflections on stewardship on the Ancient Faith podcast, First Fruits of Christian Living, and has also offered programs in the OCA, Antiochian, and other Orthodox jurisdictions. After retiring from parish ministry, Father Robert remains active in Orthodox stewardship, leadership, and charitable endeavors. He currently resides with his wife, Christine, in Central Virginia. In his videos, Father Robert introduced us to the 8 steps of the stewardship cycle, as well as some of the reasons to focus on financial stewardship and applications to the parish. Father Robert.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I have a few slides just to kind of summarize where we've went in terms of the video presentation. First of all, it's great to be here and to be with you all. And I'd ask if His Eminence Archbishop is present to ask for his blessing for me and for all of us as we go through this next stage. Also, I'd like to begin the first part of this with also a prayer of commendation. And I'd like to commend all of these to the Holy Apostle Barnabas and the Troparian for the Apostles. The Holy Apostle Barnabas, entreat the merciful God to grant our souls forgiveness of our transgressions and great mercy. As you may recall from the video, St. Barnabas carries that title, the Son of Encouragement. And he was such a great encouragement in his stewardship in the offering of that piece of land in very early in the Acts of the Apostles. And I thought it just served as such a great template for how the apostles themselves would be the ones to give example and leadership in this whole area of stewardship. Regarding that, just simply in hearing the first day and a half or so of these sessions, it struck me how incredibly broad and deep is the experience of the people who are here. And certainly when it comes to stewardship, this is nothing new for, I'm sure, 99.9% of everybody here. And so we're not laying new ground, but hopefully there are things within the way that I've gone about presenting it that might provide some insights and some ways to think about stewardship perhaps a little differently. The other thing that struck me was simply the breadth of the types of parishes that we had. Most of my pastoral experience has been in very small congregations. And yet, there are parishes represented here that have very large congregations, large teams of ministers and whatnot. And so we're trying to, resolve all these questions, coming at them from our own different perspectives. So I hope and pray that there's something that will be efficacious or speak to each of us about this. Before I go into the review of the slides themselves, I wanted to just share a little story with you about my own life experience using a shovel. And my dad, when we were kids, we used to work in the garden. I'm sure a lot of you all remember that. In fact, it's now the new thing, by the way, to plant gardens. And we relied on that all through the winter, the vegetables that we would grow. And it was also a great learning experience. I remember my dad would direct me to dig a hole and to take the shovel and get to work. And I remember when I was young, that was hard. And I'd get that shovel and it was big and it was unwieldy and I'd push my foot against it and nothing would happen because I was just a kid. I was too small. But eventually I would see and I would watch my dad when he dug. And he would just put his foot on that shovel and it just went down. And I remember this crackling sound as it went deep into the soil. And I noticed that he would pull on the far end of the shovel and that would give him leverage to pull out an even bigger sample of the dirt so that he could begin his digging process for the rest of the hole. And it struck me how this simple example It was a mentoring experience for me, a leadership experience. I learned from watching him, and how, first of all, I was like immature. I couldn't handle a shovel. It was too big for me. Yet I had to try. I had to wrestle with it. I had to work with it. And eventually, as I matured, it became easier. And I learned, for example, the principles and how the leverage works, and that sort of thing. And so that maturity was important. And I think that when it comes to our stewardship growth and development, I think that that's what we're talking about. We're talking about for ourselves as individuals and also for our parishes as an ongoing process of development of what this notion of stewardship is. And the other thing is that as we get older and as we get more mature, we're able to learn how to leverage things, as it were, how to use the tool properly or most effectively. And so I think it even behooves us at times to go back to some of the things that we have been doing for a long time and say, well, is there maybe a better way to do what we've been doing? And so it's kind of with that idea that some of these principles, I'm sure that the essentials of stewardship, we know the parables. We hear so many of the stories of stewardship on the Sunday Gospels, Sunday in and Sunday out. And we, as church members and priests, we hear about this and preach about it. And yet we need to take it deep within us so that eventually we will grow from it. As you probably recall from the video, I used this idea of a stewardship cycle as simple steps and ways to visualize how we go through and how we experience all of the dynamics of stewardship. And so I'm going to walk through each of the steps just very briefly, and as a way of reminding us of how these things work. The first movement in this cycle is the acknowledgement of God as the source of everything. And for us as doulos leaders, this really goes back to that fundamental truth about the lordship of Jesus Christ over us and over all creation. And it's a starting point for everything that we do in our lives, everything that we do in our churches, and really the growth in stewardship and maturity in stewardship leads to just an ever-increasing awareness and acknowledgement of this truth. This is kind of the basis of our spiritual life as well. The second movement is in the receiving of God's gifts with thanksgiving. We use Mary as the symbol and the most perfect example for us in the scriptures of how to receive God and how to receive his gift and all of his gifts with thanksgiving, with openness, with humility, and with that word we used a little bit earlier, vulnerability, being willing to be led down a path in life that we simply are not in control of. That's where Mary allowed herself to go by receiving God's gift. And so this becomes also then the way that we as individuals in our faith life, but then also our church faith life, being willing to be led where God would lead us. And I think this is really important for us in this COVID age, where we're going places where we didn't want to go, we don't plan to go at the beginning of the year, but we can perhaps receive with openness what God would have each of us and our communities do in these coming weeks. The third movement is, for me, I think the central movement is that before we do anything else with the gifts that God has given to us, we have to first return them back to the Lord in thanksgiving. And this is what the Orthodox Church does, of course, as the center of our life. We receive the good news of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and every Sunday morning we offer the first fruits of that good news in thanksgiving that we have received in our hearts. And this idea of first fruits just permeates the liturgical life of the church, the spiritual awareness of the church. For example, we all know that we consecrate the first fruits of the produce, on the Feast of the Transfiguration. And you'll notice that the first fruits language finds its way into our liturgical life. For example, the first fruits of the liturgical year are often referred to in terms of Great Lent, this offering of the first fruits of our time so that we can be ready to receive that glorious resurrection of the Lord Jesus. And so this idea of offering the first fruits is central then to sending us in the right direction in the beginning. And that's the first fruits, for example, the leper coming back to the Lord to offer thanksgiving to him. That changed everything for him in his life. The fourth movement is the care of all that God entrusts to us. And this is beautifully exemplified as the Lord consecrated the bread and the loaves and the fishes and offered them to the Father in prayer. So then those loaves and fish were then entrusted to the apostles. And this is what stewardship is. It's the consecration of these gifts, but then it's taking those gifts that God has entrusted to us and then sharing them, and multiplying them and seeing their service, seeing them put to service for the glory of God. And this leads then to an even greater abundance, because then God accepts this. You know, God accepts the ministries of our parishes, oftentimes the small things, but he accepts them and blesses us and pours forth an even greater abundance. This relates also to the next movement, where as that greater abundance is poured forth, we ourselves are changed. We become stewards. I like to liken this particular part of the stewardship cycle almost to like the New Testament, whereas the first part of the first four steps are likened or into the Old Testament, where certainly the consecration of first fruits and the ministry and the care that God calls for us, forth from us in obedience to his word. These are embedded within the scriptures and within even the Old Testament. But in movement 5, there's this abundance. There's this great outpouring, you know, the grace upon grace, as St. Paul says, the multiplication of the 30, 60, 100-fold. And then as we engage with the grace of God in this way, this is what changes us. This is when we serve, when we minister to others, our capacity within our souls changes, it grows, it expands. And we do indeed mature. To take, you know, again, from that first example that I offered as we began. The seventh movement doesn't exactly come only at the second coming. We are called upon to give an account as stewards frequently, but we certainly know that in the spiritual life and in the Christian life, the great account is coming when Christ will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead. And he will require an account of us for our stewardship. And I often remind of the parishes that I've served that it's like we'll all have bleacher seats together. So he's going to ask not only me, myself, what did I do, but also you, plural, what did you do? How did you work together so that my kingdom could be manifest, that my love could be shared in the world? And so we have for us and within our spiritual life, our church life, these ways of giving an account, and certainly the mystery of holy penance is a way of doing that. You may have seen note of the little booklet that I had put together that helps us to use the stewardship cycle as a way of preparing ourselves for confession, giving an account to the Lord for what we're doing, what we've done, what we also haven't done. And then finally, of course, and this part of the cycle isn't actually part of the earthly cycle, it's part of the eternal cycle, the heavenly cycle, and that is that the cycle ends in the presence of the Lord. This is our end. We have this goal of the eternal reward, the eternal communion with Christ faithfully. This is what the good and faithful steward at the end. What does the Lord say? Come. You know, those three parables in Matthew 25, they all end the same way. There's the marriage of the bride and the bridegroom. There's the faithful stewards who took care of the talents, receiving the commendation. And finally, of course, in the end of Matthew 25, come sit at my right hand, be at my right hand for the faithful ones, for the sheep. So in these ways, then, hopefully the stewardship cycle is a way of how these things reflect our human experience. And that's kind of the direction I've wanted to go with this, in simple ways that hopefully we can understand and appreciate. Then in the second part of the presentation, I did a couple of things that were more parish-based, in the idea of sort of two sides of the same coin. First of all, the leadership of stewardship, i.e., how do we as parish leaders and parish servants encourage others to grow in the stewardship of the parish themselves, and also the stewardship of the parish, and talk some about stewardship programs there. And then also the stewardship of leadership itself. And the hierarchs touched upon this in our first talk, where the whole idea of how do we develop leadership. And I remember I was touched by Archbishop Foros, his comment about the spiritual leadership that he had received from his spiritual fathers, and how that dynamic was so powerful within his own life, and has been, I'm sure, in his ministry. And so this development and the stewardship of leadership is something that can be, I think that we could really take a good look at in days. So I think what I'd like to do now is just go ahead and encourage everybody to go to the breakout session, meet for a bit, and then after 15 minutes or so, we'll come back and represent your group and give us some ideas. So with that, let's see if we can move to the chat.
All right, here we go.
Is everybody back?
Yes, everybody's back.
Okay, great. Well, we had 8 groups, and so what I'd like to do is if starting with group 1, if a leader from group 1 could just take 1 minute and share 1 or maybe 2 ideas that were profitable. I'll just say that I dropped in on about half a dozen, and it was amazing. I wish I could have stayed in each one of the groups, because there was so much good discussion, great insight. So anyway, if you could just, group 1, if you can launch and share with us an idea or 2.
So we talked about this idea that stewardship should be internalized and taught from a very early age. That children learn very, very quickly and very early on about what is theirs. You know, this is mine. If we teach them that it's not really theirs, everything belongs to God, and make them realize that they're really sharing everything from. So the idea is to internalize stewardship from early on, from an early age.
Great.
I was in group 3, and for the first question, we discussed how we'd have more gratitude for what we do have, and look for how we can use our gifts to help others in the community. And someone had a very good point that everyone has something to offer in a ministry, even the homebound. And for the second question, we talked about coming together on priorities like handicap accessibility versus changing the building, convincing people of the necessity of long-term investments, and how you really need to know your people and their gifts and what they have to offer, and how that can be a challenge in a urban transitory area. And then, yeah, that was about it, talking about, you know, coming to agreement over investment strategies and how to use everyone's gifts.
There's a lot in there. I caught just the very first part of that discussion on the changing the building, and I just think that was, you know, that just focuses right in on what we have, what we're called to steward in a new way, and so that God bless us whenever we have to make those kinds of important decisions. So, moving on to group 4, is anybody from group 4?
Yes, Father. Hi, I'm David Galloway. I was in group 4. For the first question, we discussed that if we truly believe everything came from the Lord, we would be way less controlling than we typically fall into being. If everything's according to God's plan, then we don't need to spend so much time trying to control parishioners, parish council members, everyone else. We would also, as His Grace Bishop Andre said, we would share what we have more joyfully with others. We wouldn't need to have so many different types of restaurants and grocery stores of 20 types of bars of soap, because we have what we need, and we're not looking to fixate upon an endless variety of choice, because what we do have is given to us by God. And then in the second question, we kept repeating the idea that what we need to keep going around to our purpose. We need to keep teaching it continually as generations change in our parishes. You know, we have to keep honing in on the why. Why is it that we're doing these things? We're not doing them to have a balanced budget. We're doing them to serve God.
Amen. Thank you. Group 6.
We talked about stewardship is not just about money, but there's a lot of things we can contribute. So time, your car, your house, perhaps in hospitality, your words, and just yourself and getting to know other parishioners so that we understand, as Allison said, the gifts of all the parish, whether it's what they do for a living, what they do for fun, and so we can use all those gifts for the good of the church.
Amen. Thank you. Now, group 6.
Group 6, in addition to solving most of the world's problems, on the first question, we said just how much of a massive shift it would be to truly believe this, that all of the resources come from God and that we're just as stewards, and that it would remove some of the temptation to begin your day with church or begin your day with prayer, and then you're creating some sort of divide where you launch off into your own resource management that isn't from God. On the second question, one of the priests said that we need to resist the temptation to take the easy or lucrative way out of, the parish budgeting or stewardship, and not to force our personal stewardship needs onto the community because we've been bad stewards with our resources. And then another person brought up again the point that the parish budget and that the parish resources need to be viewed to serve all of the parish ministries, not quite so much divided up, to the loss of maybe a lesser ministry or one that's not quite as vocal. It was a very good discussion.
7. Group 7.
We talked about acknowledging our gifts, first of all, and being thankful for them, and then giving more generously, and with the widow's mite in mind. We also talked about using our talents not only in our parish communities, but throughout our communities, that was a way to contribute. The word vision was used many times, a vision that is so strong that it's burning to get out, that's something that is on fire, that motivates people to give generously. We talked about building money into the budget, or building certain charitable things into the budget, and consistently increasing those over time, because those are important ways to be giving. And then also the stewardship of some of the things that we might consider bad things coming into our lives and how they affect us, and dealing with people who are difficult, dealing with events that are tough, and becoming more tender-hearted as a result.
Amen. And group 8.
We talked about, we focused a lot on question 1. We talked specifically about fatherhood and children, that our children are a gift of God, and stewarding them, and we're not holding as tightly on them and other people. We also had folks talk about the stages of life as a gift, that each stage of life you have different transition and a different understanding of what stewardship is and what you're doing with your life. Expectation that all things, also that the expectation that all things that we do are used for God's kingdom, and more particularly on question 2, we talked about consistently hearing from our priest and our leaders that all things come from God and everything belongs from God, and that we have that obligation to give back. We also talked about the leading by example, that the parish council leads by example in tithing and in giving and capital campaigns and other things like that we can show the way and lead the way.
Thank you.
We first talked about the major difference in our lives would be we live with our hands wide open if we believed everything came from God. versus kind of clamping down and keeping being selfish if things only come from us, and we need to hold on to it. And the second question, we really one of the most important things I think I said, or someone said, was that not that I said, was that that we should really tie stewardship to salvation, and not always just in a general way, but in a specific way. The example that was used was that that when I ask someone to serve in a soup kitchen as a priest, I should be tying that to their work of their salvation, not just a service or filling a need or trying to put a heartbeat in a spot, but it's actually specific to all of our salvation stewardship.
Amen. Well, thank you all for all of those very rich comments. I took the one comment to heart about stage of life. I'm sort of in a different stage of life, or moving into a different stage of life right now. So that one really resonated with me, but so did indeed all of the comments. Thank you so much. And just a final thought, that there's been a lot of talk about trust. And there was a comment, I think, in the chat about transparency. And I like to liken the fact that while we identify time, talent, and treasure as the 3 T's of stewardship, I really believe there are those last 2, which are trust and also truth. And truth is sort of the underside of, or the top side of transparency. And so I think that in all of this, may the Lord just simply lead us into our own deeper maturity, not only as individuals, but then also as parish community. So thank you for the opportunity to engage with y'all in this way.